Hello and welcome to the Michael Mamas Show. I am your host, Michael Mamas. We're coming to you from Mount Soma, home of the Sri Someshwara Temple in the mountains of western North Carolina. And this is a very interesting podcast, I think. We're going to try to give the big picture and then what's going on in the world today in that context, okay? Watching the election and everything and people being interviewed and they ask them, what's the main issue you're concerned about in the election? And some people would say, the economy. Other people would say the border. What other things would people say, Scotty? Men in women's sports, healthcare, everybody would give their opinion on which one is most important. And every time I watched anything like that, I always felt like that's not the point. The point is that the lens of perspective that people are viewing the entire situation, the world situation on or through, is twisted. It's almost like if you're functioning in a house of mirrors, Scotty, and you look at anything you look at, it's all just skewed, and twisted.
Yeah.
And so, the economy perspective on that is skewed. The people are right when they say that, or the border, they're right, or international relations, they're right, on and on. But it's the lens of perception. It's the window of perception that is twisted. And everybody is wise and divine and insightful and profound in their depth. But if we're looking through this twisted lens, then everything we look at is messed up, And so you can see it in the world situation. I mean, all the conflict and the anger and the poor economy and everything. But the point, I think, is now that, and the good news is that people are starting to wake up. I mean, the whole thing is just too crazy. And if you recall, again, my predictions for 2024 were, that it was going to be a really nutty year, a lot of conflict and everything, which obviously is happening and happened. And it's going to continue until mid-2025. The source for that is multiple. It's Jyotish. It's just common sense, really, if you look at it. At least for me, it just seemed pretty obvious that was the case. And then also, if you look at the ancient Vedic literature, that this is the time of transition and into a golden age, into a period of Sat Yuga in the midst of Kali Yuga. And during that transition period, like we've used the analogy, when water goes to ice is a more coherent state, the crystalline structure, whereas the water, the molecules are all just kind of all over the place. But in that moment of transition, everything starts bubbling and it's really crazy. And that's where we are now, and it's going to continue until the middle of 2025. It's not like all of a sudden it's the middle of 2025 and the light switch is going to go on and it's going to be heaven on earth. But that is when we're going to really start to notice things shifting. But the nature of that transition that we're in now, it could go a lot of different directions. It could be relatively, compared to an Armageddon, it could be relatively smooth and seamless, or it could be, a huge Armageddon. I don't believe that's going to happen. I think we are going to have a period of conflict like we've been seeing, and it's going to continue. but it does appear that we're kind of at the tail end of that. And it's all about untwisting the lens of perception. It's not about the thing. It's about our relationship with the thing. And if our relationship with it is viewing it through a twisted lens, then the whole relationship is messed up and we wonder why nothing's working and everything is so bad. But at the same time, there are some fabulous indications already of a golden age coming. One, the James Webb Telescope. Now they're looking out in the cosmos and they're seeing that as I've been saying, I have a physics background, and their understanding of cosmology, the structure of existence, Big Bang Theory, all of that, they had it wrong. And with the James Webb Telescope, they're realizing that they were clueless, At the same time, if you look at a lot of these great physicists like Oppenheimer, maybe you've seen the movie, Heisenberg, Schrodinger, all these guys, they were into Vedic literature. Oppenheimer even learned Sanskrit, Einstein was another one. So they at least saw that Vedic literature, everything was moving in that direction, and Vedic knowledge reigns supreme. And as the lens of perception straightens out, what we're going to start to understand is the validity of Veda. And what is that? Veda is just nature. Our relationship with nature will straighten out, if we could say it that way. And it's going to culminate in an age, and it's coming quickly, where we live in harmony with nature. We live in harmony with the Veda. It's unbelievable how the knowledge is there. It's in the Veda. But see, even the understanding of the Veda, it's expressed in terms that are abstract. It's expressed in terms that address how the laws of nature change and go through phase transitions when we go from one yuga to the next. And that's just not understood. And if you read parts of the Veda about other yugas, other, ages, it doesn't make sense, and it just seems ridiculous. So no, that can't be true. That's just all mythology. And it's because we don't understand that in these other ages, the laws of nature were different and things functioned differently. But we're going to come to know all of that. And ultimately, we're going to start to look to the Veda, but not superficially, in a profound way. We'll start to understand it and appreciate it more and more for what it is. And also the technologies that it offers, how to purify global consciousness. That's the whole idea of Mount Soma. Mount Soma, CRS, Mount Soma is the Ancient Technology Research Institute, ATRI. And ATRI is, in the Vedic literature, ATRI, you could say, is the source of harmony with nature, source of Dharma. We could say it that way. And that's what this whole thing is about. Ancient Technology Research Institute. What do we mean by ancient technology? We're talking about technology of the eternal Veda. It's ancient. Now, that doesn't mean that the Veda was back then and no longer is. What it does mean is there was a time in ancient times when people were awake to it. But then it got lost. It's still there. It's just that we're not awake to it as we were before. And so many things are pointing in that direction. Like even they're discovering now that there are civilizations that had technologies that we had no idea about. And they're thousands, tens of thousands of years old. And archaeologists now are starting to see that, the pyramids weren't, a few thousand years old. They were much older. And they were employing technologies of which we have no idea about right now, because the lens of perception, our relationship is twisted. Now, there is a scientific age that we're in, and it did marvelous things, wonderful things. So it's not about compromising that approach to knowledge. That approach to knowledge is also in the Veda. It's in the Vedic literature, but it's one small facet of a much greater diamond. So real knowledge dwells within us and accessing it there, whereas the whole scientific approach is about looking outward to find it. And when those two things line up, when the human physiology, when the human awareness is more and more fully in tune with, aligned with our own nature, Mother Nature, the Veda, all these technologies will become available. And so what Mount Soma is about is, let's create this one thing that purifies global consciousness, and thereby purifies the awareness of all the people, so that we live more and more in harmony with that. And so many fields of knowledge, like even healthcare, one really interesting thing, just as an example of healthcare, is now they're just starting to research peptides. And peptides are little short amino acid chains that are similar to messengers, hormones, things like that. They're actually in the physiology. They're natural, but these things mimic them, and they're very similar to them in structure. And they're finding that the results from peptides are dramatic. Ozempic is one example, but now here's an interesting thing, just using Ozempic as it's that weight loss drug, people inject it once a week and they lose all this fat and everything. But they're coming out with perspectives now on Ozempic that it is grossly overdosed. And by virtue of it being so overdosed, it causes problems in the physiology. So now they're talking about micro-dosing it. You still get the results, but you don't have all these potentially horrific side effects. It reminds me, this goes back 100 years with X-rays. When they first came out with X-rays, they grossly overexposed people to X-rays, and it really messed people up. And so now they're realizing that much less intense exposure to X-rays, they can still get the X-ray done without, frying the person's body. It looks like the same thing is going on with peptides. So peptides are in their infancy, but at least people are looking at them and saying, oh my God, this is a whole new field of medicine that could transform medicine. I'm not saying that, we should all just jump into the wagon of peptides, because again, it could be like X-rays, and it's still being developed. It's being researched. But I think we will find that some of the ways they have been implemented is not the way they should be implemented. But it's pointing in a direction. And so many fields, the Hubble or the James Webb Telescope opened up a whole new arena of knowledge with respect to the nature of the universe. And it's in the Vedic literature. It's incredible, So more and more we're going to start to understand. We look out at the stars, and we think how vast it is and how far away they are and all of that. The reality is all that is contained within us as us, in the transcendental depth of our being, that one thing that's a source of everything, including us. But now that brings us to another important example, and maybe it has become, I guess, a pet peeve of mine, is this whole, New Age Hippie Hinduism. I was given a talk to people from a university recently, and they were the Hindu group from that Hindu organization from that university. And I mentioned, Hippie Hinduism. I think I call it New Age Hinduism, and even the director of the whole organization, they're just lit up. And that that's got to change, because, this idea that we read a book on Hinduism and decide that we get it all, and then we conclude that we're bodhisattvas or whatever. It's a very, really immature relationship with a very profound knowledge of Hinduism. And what lies at the base of Hinduism is Vedic knowledge. And I distinguish between Hinduism and Vedic knowledge only because there are so many different branches of Hinduism. Some of them are much more aligned with deeper knowledge than others, though all of them have at their base that profound knowledge. And it's the same with all religions, really. Religions, why are people so identified or so connected to religion? Because they all speak to that knowledge that's deep inside, that place where we already know everything because we already are one with everything. And that touches people's souls. It's so important. I mean, this is who I am. This is what I am, And now a lot of people are rejecting religion. I saw a statistic. It was pretty amazing. How many people have, turned their back to religion? On one hand, that's tragic. On the other hand, it speaks to something really beautiful, and that is that people are longing for, demanding a deeper understanding of these spiritual and religious principles. It needs to make sense. It needs to be more sophisticated. And so that, too, is an indication that this enlightened age is around the corner. People aren't putting up with, superficial understandings of it. And it's not a condemnation of people that, many people they don't want to just study it rigorously, but they feel it. They have a sense of it. They understand it. They realize the beauty of it. And, I used examples of that. Like people will say, oh, God is the answer to everything. That's the only thing that's going to save the world is God. And viewed from one perspective, that's awfully superficial. I mean, what are you talking about? Some guy sitting on a cloud somewhere that's going to wave his magic wand and fix everything? On the other hand, God means what? The unified field, the Veda, the source of nature itself, in fact. The source of the infinite harmony, coherence, intelligence, wisdom that can transform the planet. So you see, it's the understanding, and so many things. Even people turning their back on religion, so many things are pointing in a direction that things are on the verge of getting better, and that's what's happening now. But we can't take the kind of the hippie Hinduism mentality and go off into egomania with it. Oh yes, I'm one with the universe, and oh yes, see, those are just tangents. What we're really talking about is expanded awareness in a physiological sense, in a profound sense, in a humbling sense. But all too often, people, especially in the West, they get onto this idea of some of the principles in the Veda and think they get it, and it's just ridiculous. It's non sequitur, Non sequitur is a great term. It means coming to conclusions that don't necessarily follow from the basic premises. You see, in that sense, then the basic fundamental premise would be the Veda, but where they go with it and how they twist it and distort it by looking at it through this twisted lens comes to absurd conclusions, and it turns people off. It turns people off to religion in general, to spirituality in general. It turns me off to, what's been done with it. But it's sobering up. That's the whole point. The world is sobering up. It's going to take time, and there are going to be little pockets in different parts of the world that are just going to ardently adhere to, a twisted and limited perspective. But by and large, we're going to really start to see that this transition into a better age, a newer age, a enlightened age, it really is starting to crop up. The seeds are there. They are happening, like I've referred to. But for the world to really start to sense, hey, things are getting better, we've got, another 8 months or so, and then I think we'll start to notice. Okay, anything else, Scotty?
You were talking about the James Webb, and then also the Age of Enlightenment and things like that. You know how the yugas, they talk about like a circle of things where you go from age to age to age to age.
No, I don't understand. A to H to H to H.
Yeah,
Oh,
the golden age
age.
to the
From one age to the next.
the one age to the next. Yeah.
Okay, I got you.
And then also the physics of things have changed over time too. Is that possible that, as our solar system, our we're in the Milky Way, as that the galaxy is going around this giant, that the laws of physics and space and everything else like that kind of change as we go through there, that are also,
it's a beautiful question.
It's all related, in other words.
It's a beautiful question, and it speaks to the interconnectedness, the infinite coherence of all things, like we were talking about in the previous podcast. Is it everybody's karma if a plane crashes and 200 people die? Is it all their karma that they would all die at that same way at that same moment? And the answer to that question is yes. So the infinite correlation goes beyond what is even graspable. How could that be? And in the same sense, in the structure of the galaxy, the position of the galaxy in relationship to other galactic and intergalactic dynamics does map, does correlate. Can we derive that correlation? Not necessarily. Is it there? Absolutely. And that's one of my things about Jyotish. Jyotish is valid for sure. The question is there anybody out there that's really capable of looking at somebody's Jyotish chart and really seeing fully what's there? They might get little hints, major trends they might see, but the depth and breadth of Jyotish, we're talking about light. We're talking about the light of God. We're talking about the mechanics of creation, and that is ungraspable, particularly from the perspective of how we go about thinking, how we go about analyzing. The real Jyotishi, the real Jyotish expert, isn't somebody that's memorized a bunch of laws or rules where they interpret a Jyotish chart by, but it's about a person who's awake to that level and sees on that level. That's a real seer, and that's a real Jyotishi. It's a great question, Scotty. And the answer is yes.
It almost feels like, where you go from just as a person to be able to see in your room to a telescope, which can see, so far, to then now you're talking about like, now we can see further than we've ever seen because of this James Webb. And we're seeing things that we couldn't even fathom just on our physical level.
And so, yes, we're seeing further, but what's the real value of that? It's fabulous. But what's the real value of that is that it inspires us to look deeper.
Deeper, yeah.
And the deeper we go, the wiser we become, and the more we start to align with the Veda, our true nature. All knowledge is contained within you. It's a matter of accessing it. But it has to be done. It's a culturing. It's a cultivation of awareness, a cultivation of physiology. It's not done by reading some New Age book about Hinduism and then deciding we get it. But it's a process, and we're talking about evolution. We're talking about human evolution, and a big factor in how rapidly we evolve is our relationship with our own knowledge, our own means of approaching knowledge, and also it's largely a function of how clean the fishbowl is, using that analogy. If the world is a fishbowl and the fishbowl is dirty, it affects the awareness and the ability to evolve in all the people. What we need to do is clean the fishbowl, and the technology is there in Vedic literature. We're going to build it. That's what Mount Soma is all about. Let's just build it. Ancient Technology Research Institute. The knowledge is there. Let's do it. All right. Anything else, Scotty? That was a good question.
Yeah. One other thing. The election just happening, and obviously there's a lot of people. Well, I had a run-in or a situation with somebody that was like, had thought completely one way, but when the election happened the complete opposite way, they did have an awakening of sorts, saying, because in their world there's no way you could have seen it any other way than the way that they were seeing it. But then after it happened and it was so far the other way, they actually did say, wow, maybe I was holding on to a reality that wasn't the way that everybody's seeing it.
I had an awakening, if you will, in that regard, when the hurricane came through and knocked out all the internet and everything for me. And so my only access to television was an antenna, and it only got one station. Now, I've said in these podcasts before, watch a little bit of the liberal media, watch a little bit of the conservative media, watch all these different perspectives. Don't just cling on to one perspective, because you're getting a biased viewpoint. But then what happened when I could only watch one channel, and I only watched just that channel for the news for, I don't know, a week, it was like they kept drumming in the perspective with little short clips of this candidate versus short little clips of that candidate. And before you know it, even though you knew better, you couldn't help but to really dislike the candidate they didn't like and start to appreciate them, at least to some degree. And the more it went on, I realized, my goodness, because people would say, how can people be so stupid as to want that candidate to win? And I was always like, I realized that it's not that they're stupid, it's that they're indoctrinated. You can be indoctrinated into the left, or you can be indoctrinated into the right, and either one can become an indoctrination, particularly when they spin it with these little, briefs and little excerpts of videos of the people. So I can understand it. And I understand even intelligent people, if they just keep being spoon-fed one perspective, they can succumb to that. And so it helped me, really did. It helped me to take on a different perspective towards people that are fanatic in one direction or the other. I think that's responsive, huh, Scotty?
Sure.
Yeah. It's amazing. It's amazing, really. The ability to manipulate the mass mentality has been raised to the level of a fine art. And people in power will stop at nothing to do that. And so what's your solution? What's your remedy? Be discerning. As much as possible, look at what people actually said as opposed to little, 10-second sound bites that take whatever they said out of context. It's basically, you have to pay attention. And if you don't pay attention, you are being controlled by the artful abilities to manipulate the mass mentality. Okay. Anything else, Scotty?
No, I think that's it.
They're all really good points. Both those points are really good that you made. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. And we'll talk with you again next week.